The wind howled across the dusty plains that morning, carrying the scent of storm and sin. The town of Bitter Creek had seen cruelty before, but not like this. Folks gathered around the square, their faces twisted with judgment and fear as the sheriff stood on the wooden platform, rope in one hand, whip in the other. A woman knelt there, trembling, her back bare beneath the rising sun, her dignity torn apart by the whispers of men who called themselves righteous. She had refused a marriage proposal, not from love, but from fear. The man she turned down was the wealthiest cattle baron in 3 counties, a man used to owning everything and everyone, and her defiance burned his pride like fire through dry grass. Now he wanted to make her pay. The sheriff, bound by power and coin, raised the whip high. Each crack that followed sliced through the air like lightning, echoing through the souls of those watching. Some turned away. Some cried. Most stayed silent. The woman didn't scream. She just stared at the horizon, her eyes locked on the distant hills, as if her soul had already escaped there, away from the cruelty, away from this town. Then, through the crowd, a man appeared. Tall, dust-covered, and silent as the grave. His coat was worn, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much. The townsfolk parted instinctively, not out of respect, but fear. He was the loner rancher everyone whispered about, the man who lived miles out by the canyon, alone with his horses and ghosts. No one knew his name. No one dared ask. He didn't come to town often, and when he did, it was never for anything good. He stopped a few feet from the platform, his gaze locked on the scene before him. The sheriff noticed him and stiffened. "Ain't your business, stranger," he barked, tightening his grip on the whip. The rancher said nothing. His jaw flexed once, slow and deliberate. The cattle baron smirked from his seat near the saloon porch, cigar smoke curling up like a devil's whisper. "Keep your eyes down, rancher," he sneered. She chose shame over salvation. Let her learn. But the rancher didn't lower his gaze. He stepped forward. The crowd tensed. His boots thudded against the wooden boards, each step sounding heavier than the last, like thunder rolling before a storm. He reached the platform, his voice low, calm, and colder than the steel he carried at his hip. "She's done learning," he said simply. The sheriff's hand hovered near his gun. "You got no authority here." The rancher's eyes lifted to meet his, pale, unreadable, but burning with something old and dangerous. "Neither do you," he said, and before anyone could blink, his hand moved. One shot cracked through the air. The whip flew from the sheriff's hand and clattered to the ground. Smoke drifted lazily from the rancher's revolver. The crowd gasped. The baron stood, his face twisted in rage. "You'll hang for this," he shouted. The rancher didn't answer. He stepped up, untied the woman's ropes, lifted her gently into his arms, and walked away, just like that, as if the whole town didn't exist. No one dared stop him. They just watched, stunned, as he disappeared into the dust and silence. For miles, neither of them spoke. The road stretched endlessly, a trail of cracked earth and thornbush leading toward the mountains. She was weak, bleeding, but alive, the sound of his boots steady beside her. When she finally found her voice, it was soft, broken. "Why did you?" she began, but he cut her off with just a look. "Because no one else would." He didn't ask her name. He didn't tell her his. He just led her back to his ranch, a lonely stretch of land carved between cliffs and wild rivers, where the wind spoke but men didn't. Days passed. He didn't say much, but he fed her, tended her wounds, and let her rest in peace. The silence between them became something sacred, something that didn't need words. She learned he worked the land alone, raised wild mustangs, and spent his nights staring at the fire like he was watching ghosts dance in the flames. The town whispered that he'd lost everything once, a family, maybe a wife, no one really knew. But as she watched him move through the quiet rhythm of his days, she began to understand, he wasn't saving her because he wanted gratitude. He did it because he couldn't bear to see another soul broken by the same cruelty that once broke him. One evening, as the sun bled across the canyon, she stood outside the small cabin, watching him mend a fence. "They'll come for you," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Let 'em." His voice was low, steady, like the earth itself. "I've got enough bullets for every man in that town." Her heart ached, not out of fear, but out of something deeper. "You risked everything," she whispered. "Why?" He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the dying light. Ain't a man worth keeping breath if he lets the world whip a woman for saying no. The words hit her harder than any lash. That night, she sat by the fire and wept, not from pain, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The next morning, the horizon darkened again. The Baron and his men came riding hard, 10, maybe 12, rifles on their backs, anger on their faces. The rancher stood waiting at the gate, shotgun in hand, eyes calm as stone. You took what's mine, the Baron shouted. She ain't property, the rancher said, his voice like thunder rolling across the plains. The standoff stretched thin as wire. The wind held its breath. Then, one gun cocked. One wrong move. The land erupted in sound. Bullets tore through dust and smoke. Horses screamed. Men fell. When the dust cleared, only two remained standing, the rancher and the Baron. The Baron tried to raise his gun again, but his hand shook. The rancher didn't hesitate. One final shot ended it. The silence that followed was deafening. The woman ran out from the cabin, her tears mixing with the blood-soaked dust. The rancher holstered his weapon and looked at her, not as a savior, not as a man expecting thanks, but as someone finally at peace. You're free now, he said quietly. You can go anywhere. She looked back toward the horizon, then at him. Anywhere, she repeated, her voice trembling. Except away from you. He didn't answer, just turned toward the rising sun, where the light broke through the clouds, warm and wild. For the first time, he let a faint smile touch his face. In that quiet corner of the world, where pain had turned to strength and silence had become sanctuary, two broken souls found something worth living for, not in words, but in the spaces between them. And as the camera fades on the last flicker of firelight and the whispering wind, remember this: strength isn't born in noise or pride, it's found in the quiet courage of those who stand against injustice when no one else will. Days after the shootout, silence settled over the ranch, broken only by wind and the crackle of fire. The woman healed slowly, her spirit stronger than ever, yet shadows still haunted her eyes. The rancher worked the land like nothing had changed, but deep down he knew peace never lasts long in a world ruled by greed. One evening, riders appeared on the horizon, men loyal to the dead Baron, hungry for revenge. Without fear, he loaded his rifle and stood tall before the cabin. You'll have to ride through me, he said. Gunfire roared again, echoing through the canyon. When it ended, only the wind moved. She ran to him, tears mixing with blood and dust. He smiled faintly, whispering, "You're safe now." That night, as the stars burned bright above them, she realized, love had found them not through words, but through sacrifice.